Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. I'm glad to have you back. This week what I want to do is I want to talk to you about data and data in your business and what that looks like. Had a dentist ask me about collecting data and how much data and how much they should use, and they were looking at a software that had 40 data points. And what I mean by that is, I hope I didn't lose you already, right? So I want to just have a general conversation about data, and so that you understand what it looks like in a dental practice. I won't lose you too much in the math right now, but I want you to think about this for a moment. So how much data is the right data? Like what amount of data should you have in your practice? And it's interesting, I started looking at software that people utilize sometimes in this industry. And I will tell you this much. I have rarely, and I say rarely, had somebody come to me and have, these 50 different metrics that they're measuring, and they're measuring them consistently all the time, and they're looking at the data. I mean, it seems like nowadays that there's companies that are measuring the barometric pressure's effect on hygiene. I mean, so I was like, when we get to this place is can there be too much data? And I kind of look at it like this. When I started doing, business and financial kind of, wealth consulting, utilizing a business and showing people how to invest back in their businesses, years ago, I would give somebody 30, 40, 50 things to do, right? So we'd have these meetings, and then when I'd get done, and I'd give them this big binder of 30 to 40 things to do. And my thought process is that this person would go back and they would take them step by step by step, and they'd get them all done. But I started realizing that wasn't what was happening. And in fact, people would not do anything because they would become so overwhelmed with all the things they had to do, because what ends up happening is, right, life and business get in the way. And unless you have a team who can really work with you on the data, right, and collecting and analyze data, because if you're going to have that many data points, you really have to have a leadership team. You have to have a team that can analyze the points with you. You'd have to be able to, you couldn't just be one doctor, right? It can't just be one doctor. You can't be in the chair all day, every day, for 8-9 hours a day, pay bills, deal with problems, and then also take the data points and start making dramatic changes in your practice and the management structure and the leadership structure. And it's not realistic. And the truth is that these companies sell these data. And by the way, we all want data, right? It's like we want it. By the way, I'm someone who loves data, and I love to collect data. I was just doing, regression analysis actually with client data. So I love data. But it's got to be key data, and it's got to be important. When you start looking at the idea of having 40, 50, 60 data points and different things you're measuring, because remember I tell you in business, if you've never written this down, I want you to write it down. You get what you measure. You get what you measure, you get what you measure, you get what you measure. If you're measuring 50 things, you're all over the place. Okay? Really, we want to be focusing on one key measurement. In any business, by the way. Now, there are other data points that are being measured by other people, but as a true leader, you're really looking at one key metric for the success of your organization. And then you work within your leadership team, and you work with the people on the team to help make sure that those other things are being managed, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. But I would tell you this, depending on where you're at, I would start with like a few key metrics. It's interesting. I've had people that buy some of the softwares in the industry that have these, like, all these different charts and graphs. And then I'll ask them, I'll say, how many new patients do you get a month? And you know what their answer is? I don't know. Hey, what were your revenues this month? I don't know. Hey, how much did you spend on marketing this month? I don't know. And yet they've got this software that'll spit out, all this information that they're not utilizing. So data is only helpful if you utilize it, right? And so, one of the things I do is I utilize the key data with people. What are the key points? Let's go back to the scripting conversation again. I want to pull this back, and this is a great point for it. Well, why do we do scripts in a business, right? Why would we have a script? And people go, well, that takes away the personality. No, it doesn't. Actually, if you get really good at a script, you can add a little bit of life to it, right? You can make it your own. But what it does is reduce variability in data, right? So what ends up happening is, if every time, for instance, somebody picks up the phone, they say something different, and the responses are different, it's hard for you to really have predictability around, for instance, your phones. So we want to have predictability, and so we want to get out of things that are variables that we can prevent. So we do want to measure data, and depending on where you are. Now, I will tell you, if you're listening to this and you have a leadership team and you have people who can grab different metrics and focus on all those metrics, well, then that's great, right? Maybe you do need more metrics, and maybe you do need more data points, and maybe you do need more things because you can manage those things. But I would even tell that organization, what is your vision for the organization? What is the key? I'll write that down. Like, what is the vision for the organization? What is the key metric that would affect you the most? And then how do those other factors, right, those other metrics play into that? Because because you can get lost in data, if that makes sense. You can get lost in all these points. And companies love to sell these software systems that have all these things. And by the way, they make us feel really like we have control. But I can tell you this with all honesty, I've never seen a business come to me and be that much more successful because they have 50 points to manage. What I would tell someone is become really, really great at managing what matters. All right, manage what matters. Manage what matters the most to your goal. And by the way, most individuals can get, like most dental practices can get this just by looking at Dentrix or Eaglesoft. Most of the data you need can be managed by your front desk. One of the things I teach people is what those key metrics are, so that you can make sure that you're grabbing the key metrics, because it's kind of one of those things where sometimes, it's a great analogy, you're trying to jump to Calc 3 and you haven't even covered addition. Right? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, by the way. I'm not trying to insult anybody, but I'm saying when your organization, one of the things I talk about on this podcast and I talk about with my clients is moving an organizational ceiling. So organizations have a ceiling based on their capabilities and based on their team and based on their vision and based on their culture, based on their training, based on so many things. There's an organizational ceiling, which means that basically an organization based on certain factors can only grow so much, right? We call that potential. And eventually it bumps up against an organizational ceiling. And then there's key moves we have to make to break through that organizational ceiling, which is more advanced. One of the reasons why practices get stuck at $1 million or stuck at 1.4 is because they don't know how to break through the organizational ceiling. They don't know how to get through that next place, right? Because those big moves are typically not just training somebody, right? They're typically not just culture moves. The organizational ceiling is a complete discipline within itself. Is how to break through that organizational ceiling. It's completely different. But I would tell you that before we try to even break through our organizational ceiling, one of the things we have to do is hit the potential of the organization as it sits today. Have you hit your potential? Have you hit even close to your potential? I mean, I think that if you look at a business, a dental business, your operatories should be averaging somewhere between 30 to 40 grand a month. And if you haven't hit that, then you probably have not hit the potential of the organization. And that's pretty easy to do, right? You can just look at your revenue divided by the chairs, divided by months. You can figure out how much your revenue is per chair. And if you haven't hit that, then I would tell you, before you start figuring out the barometric pressure on effect on hygiene, maybe we need to focus on key metrics, i.e., what does it cost you to get a new patient? I.e., when you drop a marketing campaign, how many days does it take to get a new patient, right? And then how does that affect revenue? And what's that effect on revenue? And so there's some key metrics that, believe it or not, if you use those key metrics and you focus on those key metrics first, what you'll find is, and by the way, those other data points will distract you. Now, as I said, I love data, but understand that sometimes those data points can distract you. You get what you measure. If you're trying to measure 45 different things, sometimes it can be really difficult for your organization to get where it wants to. I would say master something first, right? We master a fundamental. We master an area. We focus on making sure certain things are absolutely in place and they're repeatable and they happen every single time. And when we do that, then what happens is we get an organization that can actually, it's what we call scalable, right? It's repeatable. I could actually take your location and I could pick it up and I could plop it across the street. I could plop it in Oklahoma. I could move it to Wisconsin and we'd have the same effect because we've mastered the fundamentals. And part of that is measuring the key data points. And companies would love to sell you all this other stuff, but I'm telling you, that's great if you have an entire C-suite of executives who can manage every data point. But it doesn't really help the individual who's stuck in the chair all day long, who's trying to break through a point that maybe they've been stuck at for 15, 16, 17 years. So for me, I look at it and say, okay, how do I affect my business the most, right? What can I do today to change what data? So like write this down. What 3 data points should you be measuring right now, right? These are the things I help, our team helps with. We teach individually, but what are the 3 data points right now that matter the most to your organization and that could move you to reach potential? What I would do is I would go focus on those points first. I would focus on those points and then see what the effect is of those points. See what ends up happening when you measure those. And then go back and say, this is where I need to put emphasis. This is where I need to put investment. This is where I need to put revenue. You'll find that you'll get closer to potential by doing that. So nobody's listening to this can't measure. And by the way, sometimes, just so you know, I think at some point, someone might be listening to this and say, well, we're a big organization, so we don't need we need to measure all the data points. Giant organizations fail all the time. You get what you measure. If you want to build a great organization, you've got to be careful what you're measuring. If you want to build a great organization, you have to know what metrics to measure. What are the most important? Don't allow someone to distract you because they're trying to sell you software. Understand, great businesses, right? Great businesses know the key metrics that matter the most. When you do that, when you go after those metrics, you'll find that the organization will reach its potential much quicker. And then you can start breaking through your organizational ceiling. Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Click like, click subscribe. Love to have you as part of our audience. Have a great week.